Emma Hayes had mastered the art of existing without being seen. Every morning at 7:45, she slipped through the revolving glass doors of Stellar Dynamics headquarters, her badge card barely making a sound against the security reader. She wore neutral colors, spoke in quiet tones when absolutely necessary, and kept her eyes focused on her computer screen with religious dedication. 24 years old, and already convinced that invisibility was her greatest professional asset, the 32nd floor buzzed with the energy of ambitious professionals climbing corporate ladders, making deals, forging alliances. Emma sat at her corner workstation, surrounded by filing cabinets and printer stations that nobody else wanted to be near. Her official title was Junior Administrative Coordinator, which essentially meant she organized everyone else's chaos into manageable systems. She digitized correspondence, maintained communication logs, scheduled conference rooms, and ensured that the intricate machinery of corporate bureaucracy functioned smoothly. Nobody noticed her. That was precisely how Emma preferred things. Her phone buzzed constantly throughout the day. Text messages from her younger sister Cassidy asking about weekend plans. Notifications from her book club discussing the latest mystery novel. Messages from her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, requesting help with grocery delivery. Emma responded to each one with careful attention, her thumbs moving rapidly across the screen during brief moments between tasks. These private conversations were her lifeline to a world beyond spreadsheets and memoranda. What Emma didn't realize was that someone had been watching. Julian Westbrook stood in his corner office 3 floors above, reviewing security footage on his tablet. As CEO of Stellar Dynamics, he had access to building surveillance systems, ostensibly for safety and security purposes. In reality, Julian had developed a habit of observing employee behaviors, studying patterns, identifying potential problems before they materialized. His therapist had once suggested this might be a control issue stemming from childhood trauma. Julian preferred to think of it as strategic awareness. His attention had been drawn to Emma Hayes approximately 6 weeks earlier, though he couldn't articulate exactly why. Perhaps it was the way she arrived precisely at 7:45 every single morning. Never late, never unnecessarily early. Perhaps it was her efficiency, the way documents that entered her workspace emerged organized, cross-referenced, and perfectly formatted. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, some indefinable quality that suggested hidden depths beneath her deliberately unremarkable surface. Julian watched her now through the security feed, noting how her fingers moved across her phone screen with practiced ease. She was messaging someone, her expression shifting subtly, a small smile appearing and disappearing like sunlight through clouds. Then she would glance up, ensure nobody was watching, and return to her work with renewed focus. Mr. Westbrook. Marcus Chen, the chief of security, appeared in the doorway. You wanted to discuss the quarterly efficiency reports? Julian gestured for Marcus to enter, setting down his tablet. Marcus was former military, precise and observant. Exactly the kind of person Julian valued in his inner circle. The reports show something interesting, Marcus began, spreading documents across Julian's desk. Productivity metrics for interdepartmental communication have improved by 17% over the past 2 months. When we trace the source, it all connects back to improved information flow through administrative channels. Julian studied the graphs with interest. Which channels, specifically? Primarily through your junior administrative coordinator, Emma Hayes. She's implemented new organizational protocols that have streamlined document processing, reduced redundant requests, and improved response times across multiple departments. Marcus paused. Most remarkably, she did this without requesting approval or drawing attention to the changes. She simply identified inefficiencies and corrected them. Julian felt a spark of genuine interest, a rare sensation in his carefully controlled professional world. Tell me more about her. Marcus consulted his notes. 24 years old, graduated from State University with a business administration degree. Started here 9 months ago as a temporary hire, converted to permanent staff after 3 months. Performance reviews are consistently adequate, though nobody seems to have much to say about her specifically. She keeps to herself, maintains professional boundaries, never causes problems, and yet, she's single-handedly improved operational efficiency by 17%, Julian observed. That's not adequate performance, Marcus. That's exceptional performance that nobody bothered to recognize. In her corner workstation, Emma was entirely unaware that she had become the subject of executive discussion. She was focused on an email thread that didn't quite make sense. Two senior executives were discussing the upcoming Riverside acquisition using oddly formal language, copying each other on messages that should have been simple internal communications. Something about the pattern felt wrong. Though Emma couldn't articulate exactly what, she added the correspondence to her detailed filing system, noting the date and participants. Probably nothing, she told herself. Just executives being unnecessarily complicated, which was standard corporate behavior. Patricia Moore swept past Emma's desk without acknowledgement, her designer heels clicking against polished floors. Patricia had been Julian Westbrook's senior executive assistant for 6 years, a position she guarded with territorial ferocity. She viewed the administrative staff as invisible servants beneath her notice, except when they failed to meet her exacting standards. Emma, Patricia said, without stopping or making eye contact. The conference room reservation system is showing conflicts again. Fix it by end of day. Emma nodded to Patricia's retreating back. Of course, Miss Moore. She pulled up the reservation system, immediately identifying the problem. Someone had been manually overriding scheduled bookings without proper authorization, creating cascading conflicts. Emma traced the access logs and felt her stomach tighten. The unauthorized access was coming from Patricia Moore's account credentials. This presented a delicate problem. Pointing out that a senior executive was causing system issues would make Emma visible in exactly the way she'd spent years avoiding. But allowing the problem to continue would undermine the organizational improvements she'd carefully implemented. Emma made a decision. She corrected the immediate conflicts, then created an automated protocol that would prevent unauthorized overrides while logging all reservation changes to a secure file. If Patricia continued creating problems, there would be documentation. But Emma wouldn't need to directly confront anyone. Invisible solutions to visible problems. That was Emma's specialty. As 5 o'clock approached, Emma began her careful shutdown routine. She organized her desk, logged out of systems in proper sequence, and prepared to disappear into the evening crowd. Her phone buzzed with a message from Cassidy. Still coming to dinner Sunday? Mom's making lasagna and asking about your mysterious office crush. Emma typed back quickly. No office crush. Nobody here even knows I exist. See you Sunday. She gathered her belongings and headed toward the elevators, completely unaware that Julian Westbrook had just made a notation in his personal calendar. Emma Hayes, Administrative Coordinator. Investigate further. The wheels of corporate fate had begun turning, and Emma's carefully maintained invisibility was about to shatter in ways she couldn't possibly anticipate. Emma arrived Monday morning to find stellar dynamics and controlled chaos. Executives moved through hallways with unusual urgency, voices pitched slightly higher than normal professional tones. Conference rooms were occupied by serious-faced people studying documents with intense concentration. Something significant had happened over the weekend. Emma settled at her workstation and began her normal routines, sorting through the accumulated correspondence. Within minutes, she noticed an unusual pattern. Multiple departments were requesting copies of documents related to the Riverside Technologies acquisition, the massive deal that would either establish Stellar Dynamics as an industry leader or consume resources that could bankrupt the company if mishandled. The acquisition had been planned in absolute secrecy for 8 months. Only a handful of executives knew the full details. Yet here were requests from IT, legal, finance, and external consultants, all asking for information about Riverside with an urgency that suggested crisis management. Emma's fingers moved across her keyboard, pulling up her detailed filing system. She had maintained meticulous records of all correspondence related to Riverside, including those oddly formal emails she'd noticed weeks earlier. Now, reviewing them with fresh perspective, she saw something that made her breath catch. The emails weren't just oddly formal. They contained information that should never have been shared outside the executive planning committee. Specific valuation figures, negotiation timelines, strategic advantages that Stellar Dynamics planned to leverage. Someone had been leaking confidential information, and Emma had been documenting it without realizing what she was seeing. Her hands trembled slightly as she created a secure folder and began organizing the evidence. Part of her screamed to delete everything, to pretend she'd never noticed, to remain safely invisible. But another part, the part that had spent 9 months building organizational systems that actually worked, couldn't ignore a problem this significant. 3 floors above, Julian Westbrook sat in an emergency executive meeting that had been convened at 6 o'clock that morning. The news had broken over the weekend that Riverside Technologies was now in discussions with Global Meridian Industries, Stellar Dynamics' primary competitor. Somehow, Global Meridian had obtained detailed information about Stellar's negotiation strategy and had crafted a counter-offer specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in Stellar's approach. "Someone leaked our strategy," Victoria Sterling stated flatly. Victoria was Executive Vice President of Strategic Development, a position she'd fought ruthlessly to obtain and defended with equal ruthlessness. "We need to identify the source immediately and pursue legal action." James Donovan, the longest-serving board member, shook his head grimly. "Legal action is secondary. If we can't contain this breach and salvage the Riverside deal, we're looking at catastrophic financial losses. We've invested 8 months and $17 million in preliminary work." Julian listened with controlled fury. He'd built Stellar Dynamics from a struggling startup into a respected corporation through careful planning and strategic execution. The idea that someone had betrayed that trust made his jaw tighten with suppressed anger. "Marcus," Julian addressed his security chief. "What do we know?" Marcus Chen stood, displaying a presentation on the conference room screen. "The leak occurred through email communications. We've identified 17 messages over the past 6 weeks that contained confidential Riverside information sent to external accounts. The emails were routed through sophisticated proxy servers designed to obscure the sender's identity. But you can trace them," Victoria pressed. "You can identify who sent them." "We're working on it," Marcus replied carefully. "The technical sophistication suggests someone with either significant IT knowledge or access to external resources for concealing their digital footprint." Julian's mind raced through possibilities. Who had access to Riverside information? Who had technical knowledge? Who might have motivation to sabotage the company? The list was uncomfortably long. Victoria Sterling had her own suspicions, though she kept them private. She'd opposed the Riverside acquisition from the beginning, arguing that it was financially overextended and strategically questionable. Julian had overruled her concerns, which had stung her professional pride. Now, the deal was collapsing, and Victoria saw an opportunity to position herself as the voice of reason who had warned against disaster. "We need to consider," Victoria said carefully, "that this might not be malicious sabotage. It could be incompetence. Someone who didn't understand confidentiality protocols and accidentally shared sensitive information." Julian's eyes narrowed. 17 separate breaches over 6 weeks isn't incompetence, Victoria. It's systematic. Down on the 32nd floor, Emma had made a decision that terrified her. She composed an email to Marcus Chen, the security chief whose name appeared on building-wide security notices. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for long minutes before she finally typed, "Mr. Chen, I've noticed some correspondence patterns that might be relevant to current security concerns. I've compiled documentation in a secure folder. Would it be appropriate for me to share this information? Emma Hayes, Administrative Coordinator, Extension 472-1. She read the message 17 times, modified the wording 8 times, and finally, with her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, click send. Then she sat frozen, staring at her screen, wondering if she just made a catastrophic mistake. Marcus Chen's phone buzzed during a brief break in the executive meeting. He glanced at the notification, saw an unfamiliar name, and nearly dismissed it. Then he remembered the efficiency reports. The junior coordinator, who had somehow improved departmental operations without anyone noticing. He opened the email, read it twice, and immediately stood. "Julian, I need 5 minutes of your time." Privately, in Julian's office, Marcus showed him Emma's message. "She says she's noticed correspondence patterns. Sir, this is the same employee whose organizational systems improved operational efficiency by 17%. If she's noticed something in the communications she processes, it could be significant." Julian studied the brief, carefully worded email. The phrasing was precise, almost painfully polite. The message of someone terrified of overstepping boundaries. "Bring her up here, now." Emma nearly dropped her phone when it rang, displaying an internal extension she didn't recognize. "This is Emma Hayes," she answered, voice barely steady. "Miss Hayes, this is Marcus Chen, security chief. Can you come to the executive floor immediately? CEO Westbrook would like to speak with you." The elevator ride to the 35th floor felt like ascending to execution. Emma clutched a tablet containing her documented findings, her palms sweating despite the building's efficient climate control. She'd never been to the executive floor before. She'd never spoken directly to anyone above departmental manager level. Patricia Moore looked up from her desk outside Julian's office with barely concealed disdain. "You're the administrative coordinator? Mr. Westbrook is expecting you, though I can't imagine why." She gestured toward the massive wooden door with obvious skepticism. Emma entered an office that seemed larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Expensive artwork adorned walls. And behind a desk that looked like it cost more than her annual salary, sat Julian Westbrook, studying her with intense focus. "Miss Hayes," Julian said, his voice carrying authority that made Emma want to retreat immediately. "Marcus says you've noticed correspondence patterns that might be relevant to our current situation." "Explain." Emma's rehearsed explanation evaporated from her mind. She stood frozen, clutching her tablet like a lifeline. Aware that Marcus Chen stood by the door, and that every second of silence made her look more foolish. "I maintain digital records of all departmental correspondence," she finally managed, voice shaking. "About 6 weeks ago, I noticed emails between executives that seemed unnecessarily formal and contained specific details about what I now understand was the Riverside acquisition. The language patterns were unusual, like someone was documenting information rather than having normal business conversations." She touched her tablet screen with trembling fingers, pulling up her organized files. "I didn't understand what I was seeing at the time, but I maintain detailed logs because inconsistent communication patterns usually indicate organizational problems. When I reviewed them this morning, I realized these emails were sharing confidential information with individuals outside the normal planning committee." Julian stood and walked around his desk, holding out his hand for the tablet. Emma handed it over, acutely aware of how close he was, how his presence seemed to fill the space around him. He studied her documentation in silence that stretched for agonizing minutes. Then he looked at Marcus. "This is comprehensive. She's documented sender, receiver, timestamp, and content summary for 17 separate communications. She's even cross-referenced them with official Riverside Committee meeting schedules." Marcus leaned over to examine the tablet. "Miss Hayes, how did you compile this level of detail?" "I built a filing system," Emma said quietly. "I notice patterns, and when communication patterns seem irregular, I document them. Usually, it's just executives being inefficient, but occasionally it identifies actual problems, like duplicate requests or scheduling conflicts." Julian's eyes hadn't left her face. "You've been monitoring executive communications?" Emma felt panic rising. "Not monitoring, just organizing. I process hundreds of emails daily for filing and routing purposes. I'm supposed to notice if something seems incorrect so I can flag it for proper handling. I never read anything that isn't part of my normal workflow. And yet, you identified a sophisticated information leak that our IT security systems missed," Julian observed. There was something in his tone that Emma couldn't quite interpret. Not anger, but something else. Interest, perhaps, or calculation. Victoria Sterling's voice came from the doorway. "Julian, we need you back in the conference room immediately." Global Meridian has made another move, and we need. She stopped, seeing Emma. What is she doing here? Miss Hayes has provided documentation of the information leak, Julian said, still holding Emma's tablet. She's been tracking the suspicious communications for 6 weeks. Victoria's expression shifted to something cold. The administrative coordinator was tracking executive communications? That sounds like a massive privacy violation and grounds for immediate termination. Emma felt her world collapsing. She tried to help and instead had violated some boundary she didn't even know existed. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was just trying to do my job correctly. Your job, Victoria said sharply, is to file papers and schedule rooms, not to spy on executive correspondence and compile surveillance reports. Julian, we have serious confidentiality concerns if junior staff are monitoring sensitive communications. Julian held up his hand, silencing Victoria. He studied Emma with that intense focus that made her want to disappear. Miss Hayes, did anyone instruct you to monitor these specific communications? No, sir. I maintain organizational systems for all correspondence that passes through administrative channels. These emails were part of normal processing workflows. I noticed irregularities and documented them as potential organizational issues. Did you share this information with anyone before this morning? No, sir. I didn't understand what I was seeing until today. Julian made a decision. Victoria returned to the conference room. Tell them I'll join shortly. Marcus, arrange for Miss Hayes to have temporary security clearance and access to the executive conference center. She's joining our crisis response team. Emma's eyes widened. Victoria's face flushed with anger. Julian, you cannot be serious. She's a junior administrative employee with no security vetting and no business being involved in executive crisis management. She identified a security breach our entire IT department missed. Julian countered. She documented it with more precision than most senior analysts could achieve. And right now, we need every advantage we can get. Miss Hayes stays. As Victoria left, radiating fury, Julian turned back to Emma. You're going to explain everything you noticed to our full crisis team. You're going to identify patterns that might help us trace the source. And Miss Hayes? Yes, sir. Stop apologizing for being observant. In this building, that skill just became invaluable. Emma followed Marcus Chen toward the conference room, her mind reeling. She wanted to remain invisible, and instead she'd just been thrust into the center of corporate warfare. Everything was about to change. The executive conference room felt like standing in front of a firing squad. 12 senior executives sat around a gleaming table, all eyes fixed on Emma with varying degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and outright hostility. Victoria Sterling's expression was particularly venomous. Julian gestured for Emma to sit beside him, a position that would normally be occupied by Patricia Moore or another senior executive. Patricia stood against the wall, her face tight with barely suppressed outrage at being displaced. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian began, his voice carrying absolute authority. This is Emma Hayes from our administrative coordination team. Miss Hayes has identified patterns in correspondence related to the Riverside situation that our security systems missed. She's going to walk us through her findings. Emma's hands shook as she connected her tablet to the conference room display system. Her organized files appeared on the massive screen, color-coded and cross-referenced with timestamps and participant lists. 6 weeks ago, Emma began, voice barely above a whisper, then clearing her throat and trying again with more strength. 6 weeks ago, I noticed email correspondence between executives that seemed unusual. The language was overly formal, and the emails contained specific details about valuations and timelines that seemed too detailed for normal internal communications. She pulled up the first example, highlighting key phrases. This email from Victoria Sterling's office to external consultant Dr. Richard Hammond discusses specific Riverside valuation methodologies. The language suggests Dr. Hammond already had context about the acquisition, but according to the official committee roster, he wasn't on the approved consultation list. Victoria leaned forward sharply. Dr. Hammond is a retained consultant who frequently advises on strategic matters. There's nothing suspicious about seeking his expertise. Except, Emma continued, surprising herself with growing confidence. Dr. Hammond's consultation contract expired 4 months ago and wasn't renewed. Yet he's receiving detailed information about Riverside, and his responses suggest he's sharing that information with someone else. Because he asks questions about competitive positioning that would only make sense if he knew someone else was interested in Riverside. James Donovan studied the screen with intense focus. Can you trace where Dr. Hammond sent the information? Emma nodded, pulling up her tracking documentation. Based on response patterns and timing, he forwarded information to at least 2 external parties. One appears to be connected to Global Meridian's strategic development team. The other I haven't identified yet, but they're asking questions about Stellar Dynamics' financial capacity that suggest they're evaluating our ability to complete the acquisition. The room fell silent. Marcus Chen was frantically taking notes, his security training, clearly recognizing the significance of Emma's analysis. Julian's voice was controlled, but carried an edge like steel. Victoria, did you authorize sharing Riverside information with Dr. Hammond? I consulted him on strategic methodology, Victoria replied coolly. That's within my purview as Executive Vice President of Strategic Development. If there were confidentiality protocols I wasn't aware of, that's a failure of communication, not malicious intent. Emma pulled up another file, her anxiety now overridden by the pattern recognition focus that had always been her strength. There are 16 other instances of information sharing that follow similar patterns. Most trace back to consultants or former employees who maintained informal relationships with current staff. The coordination suggests someone was deliberately creating plausible deniability by distributing information through multiple channels, rather than a single obvious leak. That level of sophistication, Marcus observed grimly, suggests either someone with intelligence training or someone who researched counterintelligence methods extensively. Victoria stood abruptly. This is absurd. You're letting a junior administrative employee accuse senior executives of corporate espionage based on her amateur analysis of communication patterns. Julian, this is beneath the dignity of this organization. Sit down, Victoria, James Donovan said quietly. The longest-serving board member rarely spoke in meetings, but when he did, people listened. Miss Hayes, continue your analysis. Show us everything you've documented. For the next 40 minutes, Emma walked through her findings with growing clarity. She explained how she'd noticed temporal patterns, how certain information appeared in consultant communications before it was discussed in official committee meetings, how the language in leaked emails matched phrasing from Victoria's presentations almost word for word. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Victoria Sterling had been systematically sharing Riverside information with external consultants, either through naive disregard for confidentiality protocols or deliberate sabotage. Given Victoria's intelligence and experience, naive disregard seemed impossible. Julian's expression remained controlled, but Emma could see fury simmering beneath his professional mask. Victoria, you're suspended pending full investigation. Security will escort you from the building. All your access credentials are revoked immediately. Victoria's composure finally cracked. You're suspending me based on accusations from a secretary who's been spying on executive communications? Julian, this is career suicide for both of us. The board will never support this decision based on such flimsy evidence. The board, James Donovan said calmly, has been concerned about information security for some time. If Ms. Hayes' analysis proves accurate, the board will be grateful that the leak was identified before causing irreparable damage. If her analysis proves incorrect, we'll address that situation appropriately. But the pattern she's identified warrants immediate investigation. Marcus Chen stood by the door, gesturing for Victoria to follow. She gathered her belongings with sharp, angry movements, her eyes promising vengeance as she glared at Emma. You've made a catastrophic mistake, Victoria hissed, as she passed Emma's chair. Nobodies don't become somebodies by sabotaging their superiors. You'll learn that lesson soon enough. After Victoria left under security escort, the remaining executives sat in heavy silence. Julian turned to Emma, his expression unreadable. "Miss Hayes, I need to understand something. How did someone in an administrative coordination position have access to executive-level correspondence? Our systems should have compartmentalized access." Emma felt fresh anxiety rising. "I process correspondence for filing and routing purposes. The system grants me read access to determine proper categorization and distribution. I'm supposed to review content to ensure documents go to correct recipients and storage locations. It's part of the organizational protocols implemented when Stellar Dynamics updated the document management system 18 months ago." Marcus consulted his tablet rapidly. "She's correct. Administrative coordinators have broad read access for processing purposes. It's considered low security risk because they're processing hundreds of documents daily and presumably not analyzing content in detail. But you did analyze content," Julian observed. Studying Emma, "You didn't just process and file. You noticed patterns, documented irregularities, and conducted what amounts to independent intelligence analysis." Emma's voice was barely audible. "I notice patterns. It's how my brain works. I can't not notice when things don't fit together correctly. Usually it is harmless, just organizational inefficiencies. This time, it was something bigger." James Donovan smiled slightly, the first warmth Emma had seen from anyone in the room. "Miss Hayes, you've potentially saved this company millions of dollars and protected our competitive positioning. That's not harmless. That's extraordinary." The meeting continued for another hour as the crisis response team developed strategies for salvaging the Riverside acquisition. Emma contributed several observations about communication timing and patterns that helped Marcus's team trace additional information pathways. She felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated, thrust into a world of strategic decision-making that existed far above her normal professional altitude. As the meeting concluded, Julian asked Emma to remain. The conference room emptied until only the two of them sat in the vast space, afternoon sunlight slanting through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Why didn't you come forward earlier?" Julian asked quietly. "You've been documenting these irregularities for 6 weeks. Why wait until this morning?" Emma struggled to articulate something she barely understood herself. "I didn't know what I was seeing. I thought maybe I was wrong, or that it was normal executive communication that I just didn't understand because I'm not part of that world. And honestly, I was afraid. Afraid of being noticed. Afraid of causing problems. Afraid of being wrong and looking foolish. What changed this morning? I realized that staying safe wasn't worth letting something bad happen when I might be able to help prevent it." That sounds dramatic, but it's true. "I thought about what would happen if I stayed quiet and people got hurt or lost their jobs, because I was too scared to speak up. That felt worse than the fear of being visible." Julian studied her with an intensity that made Emma uncomfortable. "You've spent 9 months being invisible, Miss Hayes, building exceptional organizational systems without seeking recognition, identifying inefficiencies without claiming credit. Why?" Emma looked down at her hands. "Because being invisible feels safer. Because I've always been the quiet person. Nobody really notices. And that's comfortable. Or it was comfortable until I realized that sometimes being quiet means letting wrong things continue." "You understand that's changed now," Julian said. "You can't become invisible again after this. People know what you're capable of. They'll expect you to continue performing at this level." The thought filled Emma with equal parts terror and something that might have been excitement. "I know." Julian made a decision, one he'd been considering since watching Emma walk the executive team through her analysis with growing confidence. "I'm creating a new position. Strategic Intelligence Analyst, reporting directly to me. Your job will be to do exactly what you did here: identify patterns, notice irregularities, analyze communications and operations to identify risks before they become crises. You'll have proper security clearance, appropriate compensation, and authority to access information necessary for comprehensive analysis." Emma's eyes widened. "Mr. Westbrook, I don't have any formal training in intelligence analysis or corporate security. I'm an administrative coordinator with a bachelor's degree in business administration. I'm not qualified for a position like that. You identified a sophisticated information leak that our entire security apparatus missed, Julian countered. You documented it with professional precision, analyzed communication patterns with instinctive expertise, and presented findings that withstood scrutiny from the most skeptical executives in this company. That demonstrates qualification more effectively than any credential could. He paused, his expression softening slightly. Miss Hayes, exceptional ability often doesn't arrive with traditional qualifications. Sometimes it's just someone who notices what everyone else overlooks and has the courage to say something about it. That's you. The question is whether you're willing to stop being invisible and accept that you're valuable. Emma sat in silence, feeling the weight of transformation settling around her. Everything she'd built, her carefully maintained invisibility, her comfortable anonymity, her safe predictability was being offered up in exchange for something terrifying and unknown, but also something that felt, for the first time in her adult life, like she might actually matter. Yes, she whispered, then stronger. Yes, I'll accept the position. Julian smiled, genuine warmth transforming his typically controlled expression. Good. Report to Human Resources tomorrow morning. We'll process your transfer, security clearance, and compensation adjustment. And Miss Hayes? Yes, sir. Thank you for having the courage to be seen. Emma left the executive floor feeling disoriented, like she'd stepped into an alternate reality. Patricia Moore watched her departure with barely concealed resentment. The elevator descended through floors of offices where people worked in comfortable anonymity, exactly like Emma had done just that morning. When she reached the 32nd floor, she found her workstation exactly as she'd left it. The filing cabinets, the printer stations, the corner desk where she'd spent 9 months existing without being noticed. Emma gathered her few personal belongings. A coffee mug from her sister, a small succulent plant, and a photograph of her family, Dr. Helen Bradford, the corporate psychologist who managed employee wellness programs, appeared beside Emma's desk. Miss Hayes, I'm Dr. Bradford. Mr. Westbrook asked me to check on you. Make sure you're processing everything that happened today in a healthy way. Emma looked at the kind-faced woman with gray-streaked hair and genuine warmth in her expression. I'm not entirely sure what happened today, Dr. Bradford smiled. You stopped hiding who you are and discovered that the authentic version of yourself is actually quite remarkable. That's disorienting, but also rather wonderful. Would you be comfortable talking through it? They went to Dr. Bradford's office, a peaceful space with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. Emma found herself describing not just today's events, but years of choosing invisibility, of believing that being unremarkable was the safest way to navigate the world. Why do you think you made that choice? Dr. Bradford asked gently. Emma thought about it carefully. Because being noticed meant being judged, being evaluated and potentially found lacking. When you're invisible, nobody can reject you, because they never really see you in the first place, but they also can't value you, appreciate you, or recognize your contributions, Dr. Bradford observed. Invisibility protects you from potential pain, but it also prevents potential joy. The question becomes whether safety is worth the cost of never being fully known. Emma nodded slowly. Today, I chose being known over being safe. It was terrifying. And how do you feel now? Emma considered the question honestly. Still terrified, but also something else. Like, I finally stopped apologizing for existing and just existed. Like maybe the person I actually am is acceptable, even if she's different from what I thought I should be. Dr. Bradford smiled warmly. That's called authenticity, Emma, and it's one of the most courageous choices a person can make. That evening, Emma sat in her small apartment, processing everything that had happened. Her phone buzzed with a message from Cassidy. Mom says you never texted back about Sunday dinner. Everything okay? Emma typed a response, then deleted it and started over several times before finally settling on the truth. Something extraordinary happened at work today. I'll tell you all about it Sunday. And Cassidy? I think I'm finally figuring out who I actually am. Her sister's response came immediately. About time, sis. I always knew you were amazing. Glad you're finally catching up. Emma smiled, genuine happiness bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her chest. She'd spent 24 years believing that the quiet, unnoticed version of herself was all she could safely be. Today, she discovered that the authentic version, the one who noticed patterns and spoke truth, even when terrified, was actually enough, more than enough. She was valuable. The next morning, Emma walked through Stellar Dynamics glass doors at 7:45, her badge card sounding against the security reader. But this time, people noticed her. Marcus Chen nodded respectfully from his security station. Executives she'd never spoken to offered greetings as they passed. Patricia Moore watched from the executive floor reception with barely concealed resentment. Emma wore a blazer she'd purchased years ago but never felt confident enough to wear, a subtle statement that she was claiming space in a world that had previously seemed beyond her reach. She reported to Human Resources, where her new position was processed with surprising efficiency. Strategic Intelligence Analyst, reporting directly to the CEO. With compensation that made her gasp audibly, Mr. Westbrook takes care of people who demonstrate loyalty and capability, the HR director said with a knowing smile. Welcome to your new role, Miss Hayes. Emma's new office was small but private, located on the 34th floor, with an actual door and window overlooking the city. Her computer system now had security clearances that granted access to communications across all departments. Her business cards read Emma Hayes, Strategic Intelligence Analyst. She sat at her new desk, feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and strangely peaceful. The girl who'd spent 9 months being invisible had been transformed into someone whose observations mattered, whose analysis influenced corporate decisions, whose voice was finally heard. Julian Westbrook appeared in her doorway late that afternoon. Settling in, Emma stood quickly. Yes, sir. Thank you for this opportunity. I'll work extremely hard to justify your confidence. Julian waved away her formality. Emma, you've already justified my confidence. Now, I need you to start analyzing our operational communications for other potential vulnerabilities. Start with vendor relationships and subsidiary partnerships. If Victoria was leaking information, there might be other exposures we haven't identified. Emma nodded, already mentally organizing the analysis project. Julian turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The board wants to meet you next week. They're impressed with how you handled the Riverside situation and want to understand how we can systematically identify similar risks earlier. You'll need to present your methodology. Emma felt familiar anxiety rising, then consciously pushed it back. I'll prepare a comprehensive presentation. After Julian left, Emma sat at her desk and looked out at the city spreading before her. Somewhere down, there were other people like she'd been. People hiding their capabilities, convinced that invisibility was safer than visibility, believing that the authentic version of themselves wasn't acceptable. She thought about Victoria Sterling, whose intelligence and ambition had curdled into something destructive because she'd felt unrecognized and undervalued. She thought about all the ways fear caused people to make choices that diminished rather than elevated them. Emma pulled up her new secure communication system and began the analysis Julian had requested. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced confidence, identifying patterns, documenting irregularities, building the systematic intelligence framework that would help protect Stellar Dynamics from future threats. She was no longer invisible. She was finally, authentically, courageously herself. And that was more than enough. It was everything.